It was perhaps the greatest voice to ever come out of Richmond, a voice that has now been silenced at the hands of pancreatic cancer.
But while Dangelo may be gone at the age of 51, his legacy and music will live far beyond his years.
He was the voice of a generation. And now that voice is gone. When the world learned that Dangelo, the Grammy-winning architect of neo-soul, whose music reshaped modern R&B from Brown Sugar to Voodoo and Black Messiah, had died at 51 after a private battle with cancer, the shock was immediate. The silence that followed was louder than any melody he ever wrote. Within hours, tributes began to pour in from artists who knew exactly what had been lost. Jamie Foxx, Maxwell, and Jill Scott joined countless others in honoring a man whose sound had defined an era, a sound that felt personal, spiritual, and untouchable. This wasn't just another farewell to a legend. It was the collective mourning of a creative soul who had redefined intimacy in music, who vanished for years only to return with work that sounded like healing. Dangelo was more than a performer. He was a mystery wrapped in rhythm, and now that mystery is gone, leaving behind echoes that will never fade. So this isn't a story about loss alone. It's about legacy, devotion, and how one man's silence could still move an entire world. Before the silence, there was the sound, a sound that didn't just fill rooms, it defined them. In the mid-1990s, Dangelo arrived like something the world didn't know it was missing. With Brown Sugar, he helped ignite what would soon be called the neo-soul movement, a genre born from gospel's heart, funk's rhythm, and hip-hop's edge. His music wasn't loud, it was alive. Every note felt intentional, almost sacred. Then came Voodoo, the album that turned him from rising star to living myth. Songs like Untitled, How Does It Feel, and Devil's Pie pushed boundaries. They weren't just heard, they were felt. The lyrics, the bass, the raw vulnerability, they reminded listeners that soul could still bleed and breathe in a digital age. But after Voodoo, he disappeared. No press, no tours, no explanations, just silence. Fans called it mysterious. Insiders called it self-preservation. The truth was more complicated. Dangelo battled personal demons, creative pressure, and the weight of being labeled a savior of soul. Fame had found him, and it terrified him. Years passed, and his absence only deepened the legend. Then, like an echo returning from the void, he came back with Black Messiah. It wasn't just music, it was protest, prayer, and poetry in one. It spoke to injustice, identity, and redemption. Critics hailed it as one of the most important albums of its generation. Dangelo had reminded the world that his silence wasn't absence. It was reflection. Through it all, artists like Jamie Foxx, Maxwell, and Jill Scott called him a friend, a brother, a quiet mentor. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but when he spoke or sang, people listened. They felt understood. That's why his passing cuts so deep, because Dangelo wasn't just part of the music industry. He was part of the memory of everyone who ever heard him, a soul so rare that even when he vanished, the world still waited for his return. When the news of Dangelo's death first surfaced, disbelief spread faster than the headlines themselves. It wasn't from a tabloid or a gossip site. It came quietly. A statement from his family confirming that the artist had died after a long and private battle with cancer. No spectacle, no build-up. Just an ending, delivered with the same quiet grace that had always defined him. For many, it didn't feel real. Dangelo had built his legend on unpredictability. He disappeared before, and every time he came back. But this time, he wasn't coming back, and the world wasn't ready to accept that. Within hours, social media became a river of grief. Fellow musicians, journalists, and fans flooded timelines with disbelief and heartbreak. But it was the reactions from Jamie Foxx, Maxwell, and Jill Scott that hit the hardest. Jamie Foxx, who had once shared the stage with Dangelo during a BET Awards tribute years earlier, posted a video remembering his friend. His voice broke midway through as he recalled Dangelo's unmatched soul, saying he could feel God every time that man sang. For once, the usually playful Fox had no jokes, just tears. Maxwell, who came up alongside Dangelo during the rise of neo-soul, wrote about how Dangelo changed the course of black music without ever chasing fame. His tribute wasn't long. It didn't need to be. His tone carried the weight of someone who just lost not a peer, but a brother. And Jill Scott, another cornerstone of the movement Dangelo helped build, stopped her own live performance mid-song. In a trembling voice, she told her audience, "We just lost a true artist, the kind that doesn't happen twice." She didn't finish the song that night. Instead, she asked the crowd to sing with her. Not for her, but for him. Thousands of voices filled the venue in a moment that transcended performance. As tributes poured in, a pattern emerged. Every story, every post, every tear traced back to one truth. Dangelo wasn't just admired, he was felt. His artistry had lived in people, and when he left, a piece of them left too. Behind the scenes, record labels, collaborators, and producers spoke in hushed tones about what might be next. Unreleased material, unfinished projects, even a rumored documentary that Dangelo had reportedly been planning before his health declined. No one knew how much of that work he had managed to complete, but there was something deeper happening online, a collective reflection on how Dangelo's music had shaped the soul of modern R&B. Artists like H.E.R., John Legend, and Alicia Keys shared posts calling him a blueprint, a teacher, a ghost of rhythm and truth. His influence stretched across generations, and the realization of his loss felt generational too. This wasn't a scandal, it wasn't controversy, it was grief. Pure and heavy, the kind that didn't need explanation, because when an artist like Dangelo leaves, you don't just lose the music, you lose a heartbeat that quietly kept time for the rest of us. And for Jamie, Maxwell, Jill, and millions more, that silence will never sound the same. In the days that followed, the world seemed to move slower. Music stations replayed his classics on loop. Streaming platforms reported a surge in plays across Brown Sugar, Voodoo, and Black Messiah. For millions, listening wasn't just nostalgia, it was mourning in rhythm. On social media, the tone was unified in a way that felt almost sacred. Artists who rarely agreed on anything found themselves sharing the same sentiment. Dangelo didn't just make music, he made people feel human again. At candlelight vigils in cities from New York to London, fans gathered with vinyl records and portable speakers, turning sidewalks into sanctuaries. His songs echoed through parks, train stations, and street corners, places where strangers harmonized like they'd known each other all their lives. It wasn't about fame anymore, it was about gratitude. Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry. Alicia Keys wrote that Dangelo taught us to be brave with sound. Erykah Badu posted a photo of them backstage from the early days with the caption, "He reminded us that soul is not a genre, it's a frequency." And Questlove, who had played drums on Voodoo, shared a long message describing Dangelo as the quietest storm the world has ever known. Behind the emotion, a new conversation began. Journalists revisited his career, highlighting how he refused to conform to fame's demands. Music historians compared his mystique to that of Prince or Marvin Gaye, artists who were never just entertainers but vessels for something deeper. Even those who had never heard of him before were drawn in, discovering a man who had turned silence into poetry. The younger generation, raised on digital perfection, suddenly found themselves captivated by imperfection, by warmth, vulnerability, and truth. And in the middle of all that noise and memory, the people who knew him best, Jamie, Maxwell, Jill, and the community that shaped him, quietly stepped back. They didn't fight to control the narrative. They let the music do the talking, because maybe that's the real legacy of Dangelo. You don't explain a feeling like his, you just listen. There are artists who entertain, and then there are artists who alter the atmosphere. Dangelo belonged to the latter. His music didn't just play, it lingered. It carried truth, faith, sensuality, and pain in a single breath. He was never built for the fast pace of celebrity. He was built for depth, and that's why his loss feels so profound, because artists like him don't come around often, and when they do, they remind us of something we forgot we needed. His voice was a contradiction, fragile but fearless, spiritual yet raw. When he sang, it wasn't just melody, it was confession. Songs like Send It On and One Mogan didn't sound written. They sounded remembered, like they had existed long before microphones. He had the gift of turning emotion into structure, of making heartbreak sound holy. And yet, what defined Dangelo wasn't only his sound, it was his silence. At the height of his fame, he walked away. He didn't announce a hiatus, he didn't explain, he simply vanished, leaving behind questions and echoes. In an industry that measures worth by visibility, he reminded everyone that mystery could still be powerful, that you could step out of the spotlight and still cast a shadow. His return years later with Black Messiah wasn't just a comeback, it was a sermon. He spoke about social unrest, spiritual crisis, and personal redemption. In an era of polished pop, he sounded almost ancient. A reminder of when soul music wasn't just a genre, but a language for survival. That's why his death isn't being mourned as just another celebrity loss. It's being felt as the end of an era. one where vulnerability was art, not marketing. For artists like Jamie Foxx, Maxwell, and Jill Scott, this wasn't losing a peer, it was losing a foundation. Each of them had built parts of their artistry on the ground Dangelo had cleared. He was proof that you could lead by being quiet, that you could be revolutionary without being loud. And maybe that's why the grief feels so heavy, because deep down, we all know that Dangelo's kind of genius doesn't translate to algorithms or trends. It's timeless, the kind of brilliance that belongs more to eternity than to fame. His silence was misunderstood as withdrawal, but it was really wisdom. He gave everything he could, and when the world wanted more, he gave it peace instead. As the initial shock began to settle, something quieter took its place. Reflection. In studios, in radio stations, in small apartments filled with the hum of speakers, people began to listen differently. Every lyric, every pause in Dangelo's song suddenly felt heavier, like he'd been preparing us for this moment without ever saying a word. The official statement from his family described him simply, a man devoted to his art, his faith, and his peace. There were no dramatic reveals, no hidden scandals, just the truth of a life lived privately, intentionally, and on his own terms. Across the industry, tributes turned into action. Musicians organized tribute concerts. Streaming platforms curated playlists that spanned his entire journey, from the early days of Brown Sugar to the transcendence of Black Messiah. A portion of proceeds from those streams was pledged to cancer research foundations, honoring the quiet fight that had taken him. But for many fans, closure didn't come from official gestures. It came from rediscovery. People began sharing stories of what Dangelo's music meant to them, how voodoo got them through heartbreak, how Africa helped them find calm in chaos, how really love played at their weddings. These weren't just memories, they were testaments to how deeply one man's music could shape thousands of lives. Jamie Foxx returned to social media weeks later, this time sharing laughter through tears. He told a story about a studio night years ago. Dangelo sitting at the piano, refusing to leave until every note felt alive. That's who he was, Fox said. He didn't play songs, he lived them. Maxwell, meanwhile, performed a stripped-down version of Untitled at a private memorial. No stage lights, no cameras, just voice and piano. Jill Scott later joined him in a duet that fans called a conversation with his spirit. Through these moments, the noise of speculation faded. The world stopped asking how he died and began remembering how he lived. And in that quiet, somewhere between grief and gratitude, Dangelo found his closure. There are some voices that never fade. They linger, in the corners of old speakers, in late-night playlists, in memories that replay like melodies. Dangelo's was one of those voices. He didn't chase the spotlight, he chased truth. He showed us that soul music wasn't about fame. It was about feeling, about honesty so pure that it made the listener confront something real in themselves. That's why his loss feels personal, even to those who never met him, because somehow everyone who listened knew him, the way you know light when it hits your skin. His songs will continue to play long after the tears dry. They'll soundtrack weddings, heartbreaks, quiet drives, and nights when the world feels too heavy. And in those moments, he'll still be here. Not as a memory, but as music, because music at its best is alive. It breathes, it heals, and it outlives the hands that created it. Dangelo may have left the stage, but the song, his song, will never end.